Hey guys, and welcome back to the show. Now in today's video we're going to be doing something very cool. We're going to be putting that post request to use and giving the player the ability to create a new game. So as you can see, this is now available to click. If we click new game, we get to choose our color. So we can choose like a mustard color, call ourselves Billy, continue, and now we're Billy. We can move around. Let's push escape. Let's go continue. Billy now pops up here. See, knows that it was saved. Click Billy, continue, and we're right where we left off. So if you like what I'm showing you here, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Before we begin though, please make sure that you have liked this video if you're excited to get into it, and make sure you are subscribed to this channel. You've hit the bell notification so you will get notified when I upload next. So without further ado, let's jump into the code. So in order to communicate with our backend to create a new game, we don't actually even need to worry about our Node.js server. We've already done the post, we've already tested it, we know it works. We want to now integrate that into our GameMaker Studio 2 project. Now we're going to be reusing a couple things, a couple buttons, renaming a couple objects. Don't freak out, it's going to be okay. As the game evolves, the objects are expected to change and shift around into something that's more permanent. So to start this off, we actually haven't even touched our room new over here. So let's go over there, make sure instances layer is selected. Then we want to bring in some buttons. The back button can go over there. Continue to, let's reuse that. It doesn't do a lot right now. At present, it is the button we have in the saves room. And so now you can see these two are actually identical nearly. And that means when we've selected a save, we can click to go to the game world. We still want to go to the game world with the new game, so we might as well use that button too, because it kind of does the same thing. Then excitedly, let's go to object new. I'm going to remove this code that disabled this button. I don't need that. And this can actually just say room, go to rm new. Alright, it's going to take us to the new room. This is inheriting, that kind of does the whole hover story. And also one thing to check out, I've brought in this text box sprite from an earlier tutorial way back, a couple of years back. I was still sitting in my resources. I thought we'd reuse it. It is 512 by 68. We've got it center aligned over here. We need to create an object that'll use the sprite. So let's go ahead and do that now. Objects, create object, let's call it obj text box. And I was actually going through that video from, was it 2016 or something, and like 80% of it I could just copy paste straight into GameMaker Studio 2, which is really neat. So if you haven't seen that video, you can go check it out if you're kind of looking for some nostalgia. Otherwise, in here we're going to be doing the same thing, text input output. It's a very popular video of mine. But in order to incorporate that, let's go add a create event. Some variables here we want to initialize text. That's going to be whatever we want it to display after we've typed it. We want to make sure it's got a max width. Obviously we don't want the text that we type in to be longer than the input. That would just be a bit strange. So I'm going to say it can go as long as as wide, I suppose, as this input. Minus 50 pixels on each side to just give it a bit of padding. Okay, then blink is going to be a boolean, and if it's blinked it means we're going to show this cursor. So it's exactly what this GameMaker's cursor is doing. Blink, 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 blink. You see what I'm saying? We're going to control that. So when it's blinking, it's going to show the little pipe character. If it isn't, it isn't. So the user knows that they can type. That's what it's designed to do. So we better go and make sure that that blink can function. And to do that, I'm going to go to alarm. I'm going to use an alarm here. And let's make it blink every 1 second. So every 1 second, we can toggle blink true, false. Let's add that while we still got to fresh in our mind. 0. Here we're going to say blink equals not blink. And then again, we're going to tell it to rerun the alarm. So it'll continuously go blink, unblink, blink, unblink, that kind of thing. True, false, true, false, true, false. Then we need selected. Default that to false. One should be able to click the input, type some things, the text box type some things, click out of it, do something else, click it back into it, type some things, And also we can use the selector property to show validation. So for example, if they click it, then click out of it, it can show validation, which is really neat. Gives the user some guidance on what they should and shouldn't be doing. If an input is optional or otherwise, we can use this selector property also. And then we also know whether GameMaker needs to kind of keep an eye on what's being typed. Then, as mentioned, we are going to show some validation. That's going to be quite exciting. Is that an L? That's an I. Show validation, false. Then let's add an event, mouse left pressed. So now we've pressed or clicked on this object text box, selected true, keyboard string equals text. So we're going to set the keyboard string property, which is the GameMaker built-in property, to whatever the text is of this text box. Then we're going to go and say, oh, we're going to do a global event, global left press. So this is what happens when we click anything in the room. We click on this text box, we click in some open space, we click on another object, it doesn't matter. We just want to maybe show the validation if they click away from this object and there's no text. We also want to deselect the text box. So here let's say, well, if not position meeting, I love position meeting, it's very powerful. I've used it for like a lot of my videos over the past couple of years to do some like basic collision detection, especially between the mouse and objects. So we're going to say we aren't selected because we're not meeting the position and we've clicked somewhere else. And here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say show validation equals maybe string length of text is equal to 0. So that's a boolean, remember. If they click somewhere in the open space and there's no text or its length is 0, then it's going to show validation, and then we can use the draw event to maybe show it in red or something somewhere. Now to capture keyboard input, we add an event. It's a key pressed any, and here we're going to say if selected, so if the input or the text box is selected, and we want to make sure that we haven't typed in too many characters. So I want to check if the width of the keyboard string is less than the max width. Alright. If that's the case, so we have selected the text box and we're not right at the extreme, we are going to say text equals keyboard string global._name equals text, and we can set show validation to false because we've got some text. We've captured it from keyboard string. We've set the global name, so now the global scope is aware that there's a new name. If we've previously gone and done a load game, maybe that name was set there, go back to the main menu and resets it. So we don't have to worry too much, but at least we know at this point in time, as long as the text is valid that we've typed in, we have the global name, which is a very important property of the player object. Now we're going to go draw. Let's say, so first let's say draw self, because we are going to be doing some custom draw events here, because we're going to be overwriting the default draw, so that will make the text box invisible if we don't. Oh, actually, did we even set this? No, we didn't set this up. Hold on. There we go. And maybe let's put it in the new while we're here. Text box, put it in the middle. Okay, cool. Let's get back to it. So draw self. Then we want, what I want to do is I want to put a label at the left that just says name : so the user knows, hey, this is where I'm supposed to put the player name. So let's do some alignment. This is FA left, draw set. Let's do V alignment, FA middle, then draw set color C white. I'm setting this here because our validation is going to be in red, and if we don't reset it back to white to draw the name label, then it's going to change the label to red also. Draw text X, let's see, we want it kind of like, let's go see the sprite here. If this is our object rendered, we want to show the label over here on the top left. So that's like X minus the sprite width, the half of the sprite width, because we centered. So like sprite width divided by 2, and then, well, that's the that's the X, and then Y we're going to put up here, which is also a minus number. So let's go back in here. We're going to say X minus sprite width divided by 2. Then let's make it minus 50 on the Y. We'll see what that looks like afterwards. And the string is name, colon, give that a big N. Oops, name, there we go. Great. Then next up, let's draw the text that the text box has. So we want to put it left aligned. So let's say X minus sprite width again, divided by 2, plus 25. So it's a bit to the right of the far left. Then we're going to say Y, and we could just say text, but that's not exciting enough. We've got that blink character that we know when it should and shouldn't show, right? So how about we add a temporary variable over here called blink char, and what we do is if we're selected and we can blink, we can use a ternary expression, then we show a pipe. Otherwise we just show an empty string. How cool is that? And we should be able to append that right to the end because they're both strings. So the string of the text plus whatever the outcome of this boolean is. So either yes, it's blink and we're selected, so show a pipe at the end, or nothing. Slap that over there, and that should actually work quite nicely. Next, let's think about that show validation. Remember that property that we had? It would show if we global clicked elsewhere and we had a length of 0 in our text. Let's draw set alignment again. Now here I'm going to set the color to see red. Red is great for validation. People know when they see red text that's not good. They should fix things. And let's actually put that, let's see if this is our object, maybe at the bottom. I think at the bottom that'll look really cool. So let's steal this again. So that's the middle, and then we're going to say Y plus 40. Let's put it lower than the center. Then the text here, let's say name is required. End that off. So if it shows validation, center aligned, see red, center on the X, slightly lower of the center of the Y, name is required. Very, very, very good. And why is this still like that? Blink char, it is referenced once. That's as many times as I need it. Very strange. GameMaker, very, very strange. Should we actually go test this out? As long as you don't click continue to, it should be fine. And the back button should take us back to the main menu. Okay, let's see what happens. Actually, my Node.js backend is running. New. Oh, okay. Here we go. Select. Oh, not red. That's supposed to be selected. Let's go back. Text box. Create selected, left pressed, selected, I think it was the draw, selected, there we go. Oh, that's actually what it was complaining about. Difficult to tell if you've got like 3 different variables on the same line. Let's try again, new, okay, so nothing's going on. If I click in the open space, oh, that name is required. How cool is that? Like type, there it goes away. And if I click in the open space, after having typed something, it's not going to say name is required again. Very cool. Okay, let's continue. Now they say one of the hardest things to do in programming is naming things, and speaking from experience, it is very difficult. I mean, we've got continue 2. One day we'll come up with a better name for that. We'll get there. Selector, selector what? We had selectors for saves. Now we're gonna have selectors from new games. Again, it's a bit strange. So let's change this one to save selector, so we're a little bit more explicit about that. And we need to update usages. Do we have any usages? There's one over here of save selector, so that should match. This is just to select or set all the other ones to false, so it can just select this one to true. And I think there was one in the HTTP of there it is. Okay, so now there's no mistake of what kind of selector this is. Now, speaking of how confusing things can get, we've got object saves, and we want to create another thing to kind of render objects. Because the new game player options, or the things that they can select to say, well, I want that sprite, or that one, doesn't need to make any API calls. It's very static. It's just an object to loop over numbers of sprites and kind of print them out. How about render them out? How about we just not create an object for that and go straight into our room new and put it inside this creation code right over here, right? So we don't need anything special. No events, it just runs it when it needs to. Let's put these at 100, 100. At some point we're going to have to get a bit more intelligent about where this is placed, because if you have like 10 saves or 10 different sprites, it's going to go off the screen, which is not great. But that is a story for another time. Let's say I equals 1, I is less than 9. I think we had 9 of these, did we? Well, we had 8, so it's less than 9. I plus plus with instance create. Whoops. This is layer, and then which layer? The instances layer, so that's this guy right here, at xxyy, and we're going to create object new selector. Very similar to save selector. New selector is going to be it's going to render the sprite, and you click it, it kind of sets some globals, but it's not tied down to predefined values coming from the API, so like the X and Y coordinates and things like that. So the sprite index is going to equal asset get index SPR. It's cool that you can kind of build up these assets to more dynamically create objects, which is really nice. Adventurer underscore plus string I, then underscore selected, let's equal that to the boolean of if I'm the first guy. So I'm the first one rendered, then we're going to have that selected to true. Again, we don't want to have to handle validation of whether the users clicked the continue to button without having selected something. We might as well just set it all up in the beginning, and there's no way that they can deselect it, which is quite nice. And again, remember, new selector doesn't exist just yet. And then here I'm going to say after each iteration, let's move to the right by 150. Maybe that's a bit much, doesn't really matter. It should be standard between this and the other selector. And then here we want to set global dot underscore sprite index to, it's going to be the first one, so we don't have to use this magic. I can just say SPR adventure 1. That should get whatever the index is of this guy. Okay, cool. So this guy doesn't exist, this new selector. Let us go and create it. Object, new selector, and let's go give it a draw event. Remember, it's already been dynamically assigned a sprite. But we do want to say, well, if we're selected, then draw sprite SPR selected. We're gonna, that's that outline, 0 on the center, like that. I don't actually need these brackets because it's only one liner. And then here we're gonna say if we left press it, then with object new selector selected equals false, and then this specific one selected equals true. And then here we want to say global dot underscore sprite index equals the sprite index of the one they've clicked. Very cool. Okay, so we've got a couple globals being set and overwritten in multiple places, which is quite dangerous, to be honest. We shouldn't be cluttering up the global space. So to be 100% sure that we're not contaminating between, say, continuing a game and a new game and the text properties and the sprites and the X and Y's and stuff, I'm actually going to go and say that every time you visit the main menu, it resets all of that, right? So we want to say here that the global dot underscore ID is equal to undefined, because we're going to use that when we click the continue to button to determine whether we are going into a new game or continuing an old one. Then we're going to say global dot underscore name equals, let's go blank. We're going to say global dot underscore X, let's default that to 50. Later, much later on, we'll change that depending on what the room is. We can actually create spawn points and things like that. But for now, let's just say 50-50. And the same with global dot room ID. There's only one room for now, right over there, and we don't really use that just yet. Later we will. Okay, let's actually run this again, see that the selector is working for the new game. There we go. So we've pre-selected it. If I click in the open space, name is required, and we can select between them, mustard colored ones, like a pink one, you know, greens. It's all working really, really well. The continue is not doing anything right now. That's next. So what we're going to do is the player selects their sprite, they type in their name, and they click continue. And continue is going to then hit our backend API with a post request saying, I've got a new object, a new player object. That's going to then return the identifier, the ID, as far as the database is concerned. So if we had 6 objects before, it's going to return ID 7. We're going to set that ID 7 to a global. Then we're going to go to the room, the world, over here. And once we're in the world, now the existing code comes into place. So if we push escape, it's going to do a put and say, well, you've changed position. Go back to the main menu. It's going to nuke all of the global variables over here. And then the user is allowed to go continue from that or start another new game. Very cool stuff. So now for the moment everyone's been waiting for, I imagine, we're going to be doing some async HTTP. Over here, let us go to continue to, and again, I promise I'll come up with a better name for this at some point, or maybe split up this code depending on which room it is. It doesn't really matter. We are going to add post equals undefined. And some of you might be saying, well, why are you doing this? Because it doesn't matter. Actually, it does, because as soon as we go and add the HTTP async event and we check for post, it's actually running all the time. And if it doesn't know what post is, it's going to throw a reference error saying that it doesn't know what post is. So we're going to set it to undefined just so that it has a memory location, even though that memory location doesn't have anything physically in it. Then I'm going to go into the left press. So before we had this room go to room world, because we just assumed that if you click continue to, because it was only in the saves page, you'd be resuming. But what we want to do now is if we're going to say new game over here. To do a new game, we need to check if global dot underscore ID is equal to undefined, which it always will be if we've come from the main menu without going through the save select, because when we select one of the saves, it'll say that if you click this one, your ID is 1, and this one's 7, and this one's 2, as you select them on that screen. So if the ID is actually undefined because you've gone to the main menu and you've come directly from here, which had this guy, then it means you're doing a new game. So it means here we can say else and put this guy back here, resume game. Okay, now because we're doing a new game, I want to make sure that we've typed in a name. So if the length of our name is greater than 0 characters, remember if this is false, the validation will be showing, but obviously we don't want the validation to show and then it bypasses this event, so we need to make sure that those kind of on sync. We're going to say var player equals dsmap create, and I can actually steal this stuff from the object player escape, can't I? It's the same thing. Let's grab all of this. We actually, well, what we're doing is we're taking properties, we're creating a DS map, and then we're turning that into JSON, making sure we clean up our map, and then we're sending that JSON over to, you know, a URL, in this case localhost players, and that should return some cool stuff, or at least this will fire off the HTTP event. It'll match when there's a response. So let's copy all of this stuff. Let's steal it back to continue to. Let's put it in here. Can we fix this indentation? Just like that. And we need to do ds map destroy header map afterwards. So let's see, we have the player map, we have the name, we have the sprite index, we have the room ID, we have the X and Y. This needs to be global X and global Y. We are going to players, but there is no ID. We're doing a post request. And we're going to say post. So now this reference will be updated. You know, remember this guy with undefined? Now it'll actually have a real reference. And what this means now is when we click it, it's going to fire off that request. And then in our asynchronous HTTP event, we're going to be listening. Whoopsie, not that guy. We need this guy. We're going to be listening for a response. And again, we can steal that from the player async event. Let's grab this because there's all these things that I want to type out all the time. Continue to paste it in async. Change this identifier to the post. Check that our status is 0, and now we can handle the response. So here I'm going to say var result equals ds map find value async load result var result map equals JSON decode. So it comes to us as some JSON. We're going to turn that into a map, and we should get a result ID in here. This result ID is actually the ID of the newly created resource on our server. So when we create that player object, it goes to Node.js grabs all the values in Express.js, and that'll go into our SQLite database. The database will insert the row, return the newly added identifier, and return that all the way back to GameMaker Studio, which is really awesome. DSMap, a lot of DSMap find values though. Find value, that's result map, and default, I believe it's called. Got to remember all this stuff, and also spell it right. All right, and we're missing one of these. So results, okay, we turn it into a map from the JSON. We get an ID, and because we have an ID, now we can say that global dot underscore ID equals result ID. Very cool. And don't forget to destroy your maps. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. So we delete this guy. And I'm going to set my global error, whoopsie, to blank. Room, go to room, world. Okay, let's see if these go away. They do. So one more time, when we left pressed in here, we take all of our globals that we have. Some of them are defaults. Remember, that's 50, that's 50, that's 1. This is whatever they press, and this is whatever they've typed in. Then we convert that map into a JSON object. We destroy our map because we want to clean up that memory. We create a header map. We add our content type saying it's JSON. We obviously destroy that at the end, but create a reference to the post to do an HTTP request to this location, the player's controller, a post, putting that header map, put in the JSON. That'll then fire off this async HTTP with a request. As long as it's valid, we get the result. We decode the JSON into a DS map, destroy that at the end, extract the ID value, which is in the default position of that response, and we set global ID to that value. So this means at this point in time, the object is complete. We have the default X and default Y, we have the ID, we have the sprite index that they selected, we have the name which they typed in, and the room, which is also defaulted. And it means when we go to room world, this guy can create the player object, knows all the globals, everything should work as it did before. So let's try this out, let's play. This is very exciting. Okay, cool. We're gonna go new. Let's click around, see validation kicked in. Let's go this one and type in pink. That'll be our name. Now if we click continue and it explodes, we're gonna have to fix it. If it doesn't explode, it means that we got an ID back. Oh, okay, we're in over here. Let me bring the server across so I can show you what it did. Here we go, here's our server. Add a player with ID 3, name pink, sprite adventurer 1, room ID 1, X and Y 50. So it's telling us that was successful. And because we've created a successful instance on our server, if I push escape now, it's going to save, which it did. And if I go to continue, I should see pink right over there, as if we'd gone through that whole process of the previous video where we created it via a postman request and we just went to continue. So if I click continue here, there I am. And I can do a new one. Mr. Mustard, continue. There's Mr. Mustard. Let's go to the bottom left. Let's push escape to save. Continue, back to Mustard, back to the left. So that about wraps up this video on the post, creating a new game, plugging into our existing functionality of the gets and the puts and the gets again, get alls. And we've been able to actually integrate GameMaker Studio 2 with all of those verbs that we had done over the course of this series programmatically in Node.js. So I hope you found this tutorial educational and helpful. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you want us to do next in this series. Maybe we should make it a little prettier. It's just a couple blocks doing nothing, and people like to see things animate, give it some objectives, keep scores, things like that. I'm sure we can evolve this quote-unquote game into something interesting. If you like what I'm doing here, please check out my Patreon. I do appreciate the support from all the patrons. From $1 a month, you can be a supporter of this channel. And again, do subscribe and like this video. Project files are in the description for free. Check them out. So until next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then.